Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Malice in the Mitten. I am Tracy Preston.
And I'm Christine Mulligan.
Today's story comes to us from an anonymous listener in Bay City, Michigan. And I love doing listener-submitted stories, so thank you so much for sending this to us, because sometimes these listener-submitted cases come in as one article, one clipping, one name, one old headline that almost disappeared into the dust of a newspaper archive. And that is exactly how this story came to us. One article, one family, one terrible night in Bay City. But the deeper I looked, the more I realized this story was not only about what happened inside one house, it was also about the world pressing in around it. America was at war. And in April of 1943, that war was everywhere. It was in newspapers, factories, ration books, churches, schools, and grocery lines. It was in the letters families waited for. And it was in the fear that any young man old enough to serve might soon be leaving home.
That seems like a really good place to start a conversation like this, because we need to understand what that meant in 1943. That wasn't a casual conversation. Families were legitimately scared. They were always waiting for that, soldier to walk up to their door. They were patriotic, like on a different level than we are nowadays. But they were also terrified, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And their sons could be sent across the world and never to be seen again.
Not a place I would want to be at all. Now, before we go any further, Christine, do you want to give a content warning?
Okay. This episode discusses domestic violence, the death of children, gun violence, suicide, and the serious injuries of surviving children. We will also be discussing historical newspaper accounts from the 1940s, some of which used language that was sensational, outdated, and harmful by today's standards. As always, we will handle this case carefully and respectfully. Please take care while listening.
And one more important note before we begin. This story is based on historical newspaper reports and public records available to us. Some details vary from article to article, especially ages, wording, and early medical updates. We will tell you what was reported, where reports conflict, and what we can responsibly say, because this is not about repeating the loudest headline.
Yeah, and some of these headlines were really harsh. They used language that made the story feel like a spectacle. Like that's how they used to do the news, back then.
Mm-hmm.
But when you slow it down, there are children here. There's a mother here. There are survivors here. That really changes how we should tell it.
It is about finding the truth beneath it. And the truth begins in 1943. Not with Cecil Lisk. Not yet. It begins with the front page. In April of 1943, the United States had been at war for more than a year. American families were reading headlines about North Africa, Nazi Germany, Japanese forces, air raids, bombings, submarines, coal strikes, rubber shortages, gasoline restrictions, and war bonds. On the very same pages where the Lisk tragedy appeared, newspapers carried stories about Allied advances in Tunisia, British and American planes bombing German targets, Japanese forces in the Pacific, children helping sell war bonds, women filling jobs that had once been held almost entirely by men, and families being asked again and again to sacrifice. Drive less, use less, buy bonds, save rubber, stretch meat, save sugar, save coffee, send your sons, support the war. Every ordinary part of American life had been touched. A trip to the store was not just a trip to the store. It was ration points and stamps and limits. A drive across town was not just a drive across town. It was gasoline and tires, and whether that trip was necessary. A job was not a job. It was production, duty, patriotism, survival. And a teenage boy nearing manhood was not simply a teenage boy. He was someone the country might soon ask for, someone the family might lose, someone whose future could become a kitchen table argument. That is the world we have to understand before we walk into the Lisk home.
And I appreciate that we're saying understand and not excuse, because those are two very different things. The war explains the pressure around this family, but it does not explain away what Cecil Sr. chose to do.
Because on South Henry Street in Bay City, Michigan, that war was not distant. It was not abstract. According to newspaper reports, it became part of the conversation inside one family's home. The Lisk family lived at 704 South Henry Street. Cecil J. Lisk Sr. and his wife, Josephine, had children at home. There was their 17-year-old son, Cecil J. Lisk Jr., and there were 4 young daughters: Vivian, Kathleen, Geraldine, and Bernice. 4 little girls whose names deserve to be spoken. The newspapers would later report Cecil Sr. and Josephine argued through the evening. According to those reports, the argument centered on whether their 17-year-old son should enlist in the armed forces. And that is an important detail. But we must be very clear. The war did not pull the trigger. Fear did not pull the trigger. Rationing did not pull the trigger. And a newspaper headline did not pull the trigger. Cecil Lisk Sr. did. Whatever pressure existed in that house, whatever fear, jealousy, anger, or control had been building, the choice that followed belonged only to him. And before morning, 2 little girls would be dead. One child would be catastrophically wounded, another would survive. And Josephine Lisk would be left carrying the kind of grief no mother should ever have to carry. The old headlines called Cecil's actions many things. They used words like berserk. They called it a quarrel. They framed it like a sudden storm. But when we tell this story now, we are going to be more careful than that, because this was not just a quarrel. This was domestic violence.
And when we name it that way, the whole story changes. It is no longer just an old headline about a family tragedy. It becomes a part of a larger pattern where the danger inside of the home is minimized until it becomes impossible to ignore.
This was a man turning violence toward his own family. And it unfolded while a country at war watched from the front page, unable to save the children inside that house. That night at 704 South Henry Street, the argument did not end when the lights went out. It moved deeper into the house. And soon, Josephine Lisk would only have one choice left. She would have to get out, while leaving her daughters inside. By the evening of April 26, 1943, the Lisk home probably looked like any other house on that Bay City block. A family inside, children upstairs or nearby, a mother trying to manage the impossible emotional weight of a household in wartime, a teenage son whose future may have been changing faster than anyone was ready for, and a father whose anger, according to newspaper accounts, had already begun to take over the night. The articles do not give us a soft, detailed portrait of Josephine Lisk. They don't tell us what she liked, what made her laugh, what kind of mother she was when the house was quiet. They do not tell us if she sang to her children, if she kept a neat kitchen, or if she worried every time the mail came. But they do tell us this: Josephine was in that house. She was arguing with her husband, and at some point she realized the danger was no longer just words.
Yeah, that sentence right there, no longer just words. That gives me chills, because you think about all the survivors, and a lot of them know that moment. The moment when the air changes. The moment when an argument becomes something else. And Josephine must have known she had to get out.
The newspapers reported that Cecil and Josephine had been arguing for hours. By around 10:45 that night, they were preparing to go to bed. But the argument between them was still ongoing. And according to the reports, it centered on their 17-year-old son, Cecil Lisk Jr., and whether he should enlist in the armed forces. That is a detail that pulls the outside world directly into that little house. Because all across America, families were having conversations just like it. Some sons wanted to go. Some parents encouraged it. Some parents feared it. And some families saw enlistment as duty. Others saw it as the moment their child stopped belonging to the home and started belonging to the war. But in the Lisk house, whatever that conversation began as, it became something else, something darker, something dangerous. And at some point, Cecil Sr. left the bedroom, and when he came back, he was carrying a shotgun.
That detail right there, that is terrifying escalation. And it also tells us why Josephine's escape matters so much. She was not abandoning anyone. She was trying to survive long enough to get help. But I'm going to reserve the right that I don't know if I would have done that.
I feel 100% the same. I would have had to scoop up them kids.
But you know what? Hindsight is always 20/20.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely feel like I would have murdered him. However,
Yeah.
I would have definitely took my kids before I took off.
Yeah.
But anyway, I digress.
Right. Same. Now that is the moment everything changed, because there is a line between an argument and a threat. There's a line between fear and violence. And when Cecil returned with that weapon, Josephine understood that her life and the lives of her children were in danger. The articles say she escaped through a bedroom window.
And I keep thinking about the physical reality of that. Climbing out of your own bedroom window in the middle of the night, running to a neighbor, trying to make someone understand that your children are still inside. That is panic and survival happening at the same time.
Yeah, just sitting with that for a moment. A mother climbing out of her own home in the middle of the night, not walking out the front door or stepping outside to cool off, escaping through a window. That one detail tells us so much about the terror inside that room. Josephine did not leave because the argument was over. She left because she had to get help. And the unbearable part is that she could not take her children with her. Her daughters were still inside. Vivian was 5 years old. Kathleen was only a toddler. Geraldine was 10, and Bernice was 8. 4 little girls inside the house with a father who was losing control. And outside, Josephine ran for help. The newspapers say she went to a neighbor. Can you just imagine that knock on the door? The panic on her face, probably barefoot in her night clothes, because it was late and she had just escaped through a window. trying to make someone understand that something terrible was happening inside her home. The police were called, and when officers arrived at South Henry Street, the situation had already become a standoff. Cecil had barricaded himself inside the house along with their children, and this is where the story becomes almost unbearable, because everyone outside knew there were children inside.
That part is really hard for me, because everyone outside knew children were inside. Cecil knew too, and he was using it to his advantage. He knew exactly who was in that house with him.
Now, the articles describe police surrounding the house. At least one account says neighbors were used to try to persuade him to spare the children. And that detail is so haunting, because it means the people outside were not only dealing with an armed man, they were dealing with time. Every minute was crucial. Every sound from inside the house mattered. Every pause must have felt like a decision being made behind walls no one could see through. And Josephine was outside that house, alive because she escaped, but separated from her daughters. There is no version of that moment that is not torture. No mother should ever have to stand outside her home and wonder what is happening to her children inside. No mother should have to listen for shots or have to wait for police to decide how to get through a door, through a window, through a barricade, and through a man's rage. The newspapers tell us the standoff lasted for hours. Some reports say around 4 hours. And during that time, the Lisk home was no longer just a home. It was a locked room, a crime scene waiting to happen, a family trapped between the violence inside and the helplessness outside. Eventually, police used tear gas. That was the tactic they turned to after other efforts failed. They threw tear gas into the home, trying to force Cecil out, an attempt to end the standoff, trying somehow to save the children. But the moment tear gas entered the house, Cecil did not surrender. He turned the shotgun on his daughters, Vivian, Kathleen, Geraldine, Bernice, and then he turned it on himself. And after hours of waiting, after Josephine's escape, after the neighbors' pleas, after police surrounded that house on South Henry Street, the silence finally broke in the worst possible way. When officers got inside, they found the children wounded. Cecil Lisk Sr. was dead. But the story did not end in that house, because some of the girls were still alive. And now, the race moved from South Henry Street to the hospital. Vivian, Kathleen, Geraldine, and Bernice were all taken. Now, the reports vary slightly on which hospital treated which family member, but Mercy Hospital appears again and again in the coverage. And by morning, the headlines began to spread from Bay City to Marshall to South Haven, Altoona, Twin Falls, St. Joseph, Ludington, Chillicothe. The story traveled across the country in small columns and brutal headlines. But behind every one of those headlines was Josephine, a mother who had escaped through a window to get help. A mother whose children had been carried from her home wounded. A mother who now had to wait again, not outside the house this time, but in a hospital, waiting to learn which of her daughters would live and which ones would not. When police entered the Lisk home, the immediate danger was over, but the devastation was only beginning. And from that moment, the story split into two places: the house where the violence happened and the hospital where everyone waited to see who could still be saved. The articles are not perfectly consistent in every detail. Again, some say Mercy Hospital and some mention General Hospital. Some reports were written so quickly that names, ages, and conditions shifted from one wire story to the next. That happens often in breaking news, especially in older cases. The first confirmed death was Vivian Lisk. She was 5 years old. 5. Old enough to have a voice, old enough to know her family, old enough to be scared. Vivian died shortly after being taken to the hospital.
5 years old, a kindergartner that should have been learning songs, playing outside, asking a million questions, and being tucked into bed.
And then there was Kathleen. Some articles describe Kathleen as 18 months old. Others rounded her age to 2. Either way, she was just a baby.
Yeah, I don't think that distinction matters. 18 months, 2 years old. Either way, Kathleen was tiny, completely dependent on adults around her. A toddler.
Just a toddler. A child whose entire world would have been the people in that house. The local reporting said Kathleen died later the following morning around 9:45 a.m. So by the time Bay City woke up to the news, Josephine had already lost 2 daughters, Vivian and Kathleen. 2 children dead because their father made a choice that no amount of wartime pressure, family conflict, anger, fear, or despair can explain away. And then there were the 2 surviving girls. Bernice, 8 years old, was wounded. And the early report said she was not believed to be seriously injured. And one of the follow-up articles gave me one of the most important details I found. Josephine and Bernice were discharged from the hospital by the following afternoon. Because at first, I was not sure what happened to Bernice. Some later memorial information created confusion. And in a case this old, confusion is dangerous. It is how victims get counted incorrectly. It is how survivors disappear. So I slowed down. I went through article after article, and the newspaper trail shows Bernice surviving the initial shooting, being treated, and leaving the hospital with her mother. That does not mean she was untouched. Survival is not the same thing as being okay. Bernice was 8 years old when her father shot her sisters, when she became one of the children carried out of that house, when her mother took her out of the hospital into a world where Vivian and Kathleen were gone. So when we say Bernice survived, we say it with care, because surviving that night meant living with it.
And that is a huge point to make. Sometimes when we say someone survived, people hear that as a happy ending. But for Bernice, surviving meant growing up after that night, after losing her sisters, after knowing what happened inside her home. That has got to be hard to live with.
I couldn't even imagine the trauma. And then there was Geraldine. She was 10 years old. In some wire reports, her name appears incorrectly as Genevieve, but the stronger follow-up reporting identifies her as Geraldine Lisk, and her injuries were catastrophic. By April 29th, newspapers were reporting that she was in critical condition. One headline called her the 4th victim of the Bay City shooting. But that headline can be misleading. It did not mean Geraldine had died. It meant she was the 4th child shot, and doctors feared she might not survive. The report said her condition was worsening, said she was sinking rapidly, said attendants at Mercy Hospital considered her condition critical. And then, by May 1st, another update appeared. Doctors had amputated Geraldine's right arm. She was 10 years old, and surgeons removed her arm in an attempt to save her life.
That is devastating. And I'm glad we're not letting that become just a medical update. Geraldine was a child. She had to wake up into a completely different life because of what her father did to her.
And that sentence is hard to say, and it should be, because the story cannot only be about the father or the standoff or the old headlines that treated the violence like spectacle. This story has to stop here with Geraldine, with the little girl who lived through the shooting, with the child whose body carried the evidence of what happened in that house, with the child whose name nearly got blurred in the wire reports. Geraldine did not deserve to become a footnote beneath Cecil Lisk's name. None of them did. They were children, sisters, and daughters, and on the morning of April 27, 1943, their lives became the center of a story most newspapers told through the actions of the man who hurt them. That is what old coverage often did. It led with him, described him, framed the violence through his anger, his weapon, his standoff, his death. And yes, those facts do matter, but they are not the whole story. Because while newspapers across the country printed columns about Cecil Lisk, Josephine was still alive. Bernice was still alive. Geraldine was fighting for her life. And two little girls, Vivian and Kathleen, were gone. The articles moved quickly. So quickly that even the final outcome for Geraldine becomes difficult to trace in a newspaper record. I found repeated reports of her critical condition and multiple May 1 articles confirming her right arm was amputated. But after that, the newspaper trail quiets. And that silence may tell us something. Because in a case that had already been picked up by wire services, if Geraldine had died, there likely would have been at least one or more short item, like a death notice, a funeral notice, a headline saying the death toll has risen, but I didn't find that. Now later, public memorial and alumni records appear to show Geraldine survived and lived into adulthood. But because we always want to be careful, here is the most responsible way I can say it. Newspaper reports confirm that Geraldine survived the initial shooting, remained in grave condition, and lost her right arm. Later, public records appear to indicate she lived beyond childhood, but the newspaper trail I found goes quiet after those early medical updates. And maybe that quiet matters too. Because for survivors, sometimes the public story ends long before the private one does. The reporters move on, the columns shrink, the names stop appearing, but the people who lived through it do not move on in the same way. Josephine still had to bury Vivian and Kathleen, care for Bernice, wait at Geraldine's bedside, and face the absence of her husband, not as a victim of some faceless tragedy, but as the man who had chosen to destroy their family. And somewhere in all of this was 17-year-old Cecil J. Lisk Jr.
I find that interesting, and I guess you have to be careful with that, because when a newspaper says the argument was about his enlistment, it can accidentally make him sound connected to the cause, but he was not responsible. He was a teenager.
Right. The son at the center of the reported argument. The young man whose possible enlistment became part of the newspaper explanation. Cecil Jr. did not cause this. He did not choose this. He was a teenager living in wartime America, in a family where one father's violence turned a discussion about service into a nightmare. And while the newspapers focused on the dead and wounded girls, Cecil Jr. was also left with the story no child should have to carry. His father was dead. 2 of his sisters were dead. One sister grievously wounded, another recovering from injuries. His mother had survived by escaping through a window. And the world outside just kept going. The war kept going. The headlines kept printing. Factories kept running. War bonds kept selling. And young men kept leaving. And inside the Lisk family, nothing would ever be whole again. By the end of the first week, the facts were beginning to settle into place. Cecil Lisk Sr. was dead. Vivian and Catherine were dead. Bernice survived. Geraldine was still fighting. Josephine escaped, but escape was not the same as freedom from what happened, because when the immediate violence ended, the aftermath began. And for Josephine Lisk, that aftermath would be measured in hospital rooms, funeral arrangements, unanswered questions, and the impossible task of living after the worst night of her life. By the time the Lisk story reached newspapers across the country, the worst of the physical violence had already happened. But newspaper stories have a way of making tragedy feel contained through a headline, a few paragraphs, a list of names, a motive reduced to one sentence, a house number, a hospital update, a final line, and then the paper moves on. That is one of the hardest parts of researching older cases, because the newspapers give us the public record, but they do not always give us the human record. They tell us what happened.
And they also sensationalize a lot of things. So I do want to just add that little thought in there, is that maybe them telling the story about how the argument started about their son going to war or not, maybe that was just a grab at reading attention. But whatever happens, after everyone stops reading the newspapers, that's the part I always wonder about. What did Josephine do the next morning? What did the surviving children ask? What did they struggle with the most? How did anyone begin explaining any of this to them?
Right, and I agree with you. Throw out the catchy headlines just to sell the papers, the shock value. They rarely tell us what it felt like to live after it. For Josephine, there was no moving on to the next column. There was only the next hour, the next hospital hallway, the next conversation with doctors, the next time someone said Vivian or Kathleen's name, the next time Bernice looked for her sisters, the next time Cecil Jr. had to hear his father's name attached to what happened. And Geraldine still had to survive. The newspapers told readers that her right arm had been amputated in an attempt to save her life. But they did not tell us what came after the surgery, whether she woke up asking for her mother, how anyone explained to a 10-year-old child that 2 of her sisters were dead, or how she processed the loss of her arm, the loss of her family as she knew it, and the knowledge that the person responsible was her father. That is the part the article cannot hold. And maybe that is why this case stayed with the anonymous listener who sent it to us. Because even in a short clipping, you can feel the size of what was missing. The article gives you the violence, but your heart immediately asks about the survivors. How does a family continue after the person who was supposed to protect the house become the danger from within? And those are not easy questions. And with historical cases, sometimes we just don't get the clean answers. But we can be honest about what the record shows and careful about what it does not. What we know is Josephine escaped.
It just tells us that she was in danger. And I think it also protects her from judgment, because she did what survivors are so often told to do. She got out to go get help.
Right. She did not simply leave. She didn't walk away from a disagreement. She climbed out of a window because her husband had returned with a shotgun. She ran for help. And then she had to live with the fact that help could not reach her daughters in time to stop what happened. That is a burden no one should carry. And yet, women like Josephine have carried it across generations. Domestic violence is often discussed as something private, something contained inside a home, something between 2 adults. But this case shows the lie in that. Domestic violence does not stay neatly between two people. It spreads through the whole household. It reaches children, neighbors, police, hospitals, funerals, and future families who inherit the silence. And in 1943, the language about that violence was limited. The newspapers did not have the vocabulary we use today. They did not talk about coercive control, family annihilation, or trauma-informed survival. They talk about a quarrel, a man going berserk, a father killing himself and his children. And while some of that reporting preserved crucial facts, the language also flattened the story, because quarrel is too small a word for what happened. A quarrel is an argument over money, a slammed door, two people angry and later sorry. This was not a quarrel. This was a man escalating from conflict to lethal violence. And berserk is not enough either, because that word makes the violence sound like a sudden break from reality, something wild and almost separate from responsibility. Cecil Lisk had choices at every step. He chose to leave the bedroom, to return with a weapon, to not surrender, to keep his children inside, and he chose to fire. The war may have been outside. The argument may have been about enlistment. The pressure of 1943 may have been real, but the responsibility belongs to him. And that is where this story must be very clear. We can understand the historical pressure without excusing the violence. We can talk about wartime fear without turning it into a motive that cleans up what he did. We can acknowledge that families were terrified of losing sons to war, while also saying that Josephine and the children were not responsible for his reaction. But when violence happens inside a family, people often search for the one thing that caused it: the argument, the money problem, the war, the job loss, stress, drinking, fear, and humiliation. But those things do not cause someone to shoot children. They may belong in the background. They may explain the atmosphere. They may help us understand the pressure inside the room, but they do not remove the choice and blame. Cecil Lisk Sr. did not lose his family. He took parts of it with him. Vivian and Kathleen did not die because America was at war. They died because their father killed them. Geraldine did not lose her arm because of rationing, headlines, or enlistment pressure. She lost it because her father shot her. Bernice did not become a survivor because of a family disagreement. She became a survivor because she lived through violence no child should ever face. And Josephine did not become a grieving mother because she failed to prevent what happened. She became a grieving mother because the man inside the house chose to hurt the people she loved most. Survivors are often left with guilt that does not belong to them. Josephine may have replayed that night for the rest of her life. The window, the neighbor, the police, the waiting, the shots, the hospital, the names: Vivian, Kathleen, Geraldine, Bernice. She may have asked herself impossible questions. Could she have gotten out sooner? Could she have taken one child? Could she have said something different? Could the police have entered faster? And could anyone have stopped him?
All of those questions are self-abuse and cruel because they land on the people who were trying to survive. Josephine did not create the danger. Cecil did. The children did not create the danger. Cecil did.
The person who created the danger was Cecil, not Josephine or Cecil Jr. or the children or the war. Just one man, Cecil. And still, the aftermath did not belong to him. That is another cruelty in cases like this. The person who commits the violence may die in the act, but the survivors inherit the wreckage. The neighbors on South Henry Street inherited the memory of what happened on their block, and Bay City inherited a tragedy that was reported across the country, then slowly faded back into the archive until one listener found it, until one article was sent in. And that is why we do this. Not to reopen pain for the sake of telling a dark story, not to make spectacle out of old violence, but because the way a story is told matters. And for too long, stories like this were told through the man at the center of the violence, his anger, his actions, his death, his headline. But we are not going to leave it there, because this story does not belong only to Cecil Lisk Sr. It belongs to the mother who escaped, the children who died, the children who survived, and the family that had to keep living after the newspaper columns ended. By May of 1943, America was still at war. The headlines kept moving. The names of battles changed. The ration calendars updated. The factories kept running. Trains kept carrying soldiers. Front pages filled with new losses. But at 704 South Henry Street, there was a different kind of silence. The silence after sirens, after visitors leave, of empty beds. The silence of a child's name that can no longer be called up the stairs. And somewhere inside that silence, Josephine had to begin again. Not because the story was over, but because survival demands things grief should never have to. After the headlines moved on, the Lisk family did not. That is something we must keep coming back to, because a newspaper article can end with a hospital update, a funeral notice, or a sentence about a child's condition. But families do not end that neatly. They keep breathing, waking up, walking through rooms that still look the same, even though nothing inside them is the same at all. For Josephine, survival began in terror. But survival is not the clean ending people sometimes imagine. It is not the moment danger stops. It's what comes after. It's the hospital, the police questions, funeral arrangements, condolences, whispers, newspaper columns, bills, the empty chairs at the dinner table, the bedroom where Vivian and Kathleen should have been, the child who survived beside her, the child still fighting in a hospital bed, and the son whose name had been pulled into the story because of the reported argument over enlistment. Josephine did not just survive a night of violence. She survived the collapse of her family, and she had to do it in public.
That just adds another layer. This was not only a private grief. Her family's worst nightmare was printed in newspapers across the country, sometimes with language that had very little tenderness to it.
That is something we sometimes forget with these older cases. Even when the articles were short, the whole community knew. Neighbors, police, hospital staff, readers across Michigan, readers across the country. The story appeared in papers far from Bay City, sometimes reduced only to a few paragraphs, but carrying the family's name. And then, after those names traveled across the wire, the country turned the page. Whatever was said that night, whatever the argument sounded like, whatever Cecil Sr. believed or feared or demanded, the violence was his responsibility alone. In family annihilation cases, the person who commits the violence often tries to take control of the final chapter. They decide who lives, who dies, what the last moment looks like. They leave survivors with grief and questions and guilt that should never have been theirs. But Cecil Sr. did not get to define the whole story. Josephine escaped, Bernice survived, Geraldine fought to live. Cecil Jr. continued beyond that night, and Vivian and Kathleen deserve to be remembered not only for how they died, but because they lived. They were sisters. They were daughters. They had a home, a mother, siblings, a neighborhood, a place in the world. And even if history only gives us small details, their names are still here. not because we can know everything, but because silence is not the same thing as peace, and forgotten is not the same thing as healed. This is not only a story about what happened on South Henry Street, it is a story about how domestic violence steals more than lives. It steals safety, childhood, memory, the shape of a family, and then, after everything, it asks the survivors to carry what remains. And that is why we cannot tell the story through Cecil's name alone. We have to keep turning the lens away from the man who made the choice and back toward the people who paid for it. And the truth is this: the war was outside the window, but the danger was inside the house. So, to our anonymous listener in Bay City, thank you for sending this in, for trusting us with it, and for seeing an old clipping and understanding that there were real people behind it.
If you are in the United States and need domestic violence support, you can contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Text START, S-T-A-R-T, to 88788 or visit thehotline.org. Thanks for listening. I'm Christine Mulligan.
And I'm Tracy Preston.
And this is Malice in the Mitten,
where the story matters,
but the truth matters more.
If you like this episode, please follow Malice in the Mitten wherever you listen. It truly helps more people discover Michigan's forgotten stories, and it helps us to keep bringing these names back into the light. And if you know of a Michigan story that you would like me to dig into, please send me an email at maliceinthemitten@gmail.com. Thank you as always for listening, and we will see you all back here on Wednesday for Round Robin.
All right, smash those buttons, give us all the stars, the likes, the heart, do all the things you need to do on whatever platforms you're listening to us on. Thanks, bye.
Bye.